Hi, welcome to today's session of Yasas DevX Suite. Today we will see how to create a web services before operation rule. This rule manipulates the attributes before any web service operation, like aggregation or any provisioning operation that is usually used for provisioning a user access, for example. And the use case for today is we'll retrieve the request information from the sale point object and look at the role information inside it. And here in this use case, role is a combination of the role name and an object ID, from where we will retrieve the role and try to provision that role for the user. So update the map with that correct role information. If there is no role available in the request information for the user, then we will try to add a default role for that user. And we will need few data elements that will support this use case. Sale point will provide the request information in the request endpoint object. So we will need data elements to appropriately retrieve the map information in the data type of map. So we will need a list object and a map object to get the request information in the map format. And from there, we will retrieve the role information. And the role information is typically for this use case is in the form of an array element. So we will need the array list element to support the format, and from that we will retrieve the role. And the logic goes, some of the elements of the flow logic for the rule are: check if the request body is not empty so that we can proceed with the planned actions. And we will also check for the role information, the usual checks whether it is empty or it is an array list from where we will retrieve the role as part of the array, and update the request body with the accurate rule name. So if the roles are not provided or not found, then we will set the default role for the user and update the map element with the appropriate role information. And a default rule preview is available for this rule, where it supports the endpoint object where the sale point provides the request information. And there is also a return for the request endpoint, which is typically the web services um, object, which will get returned from this rule. Okay, let's go ahead and create the web services before operation rule in Yasas DevX Suite. To do that, provide a rule name. Rule embeds role information in the request. And the description is optional. You can add that optional description. Let's go ahead and create the data elements that are required for our use case. So first we'll create a list data element that will retrieve the JSON body as a list. So we will use JSON util to list function, and then we will retrieve the first element from this list as a map object. Create a map object, and we'll use the added data element from the, it shows the list of data elements which are available to be used and to retrieve value from. We can apply functions, and here we will use the first element from the list, and this will get the request body as a map data element. And next we will get the role information from this map. For that I will use object ID, and this will be an object, and we need to get it from our JMap, and we will use the map operation get, and our key will be the same name as I have used for the data element. And we will also need a role data element of string data type, and let's initialize it to null. And then we will need an array element. Let's call it as roles array. And let's define it as a array list data element, which will be used to convert the retrieved roles object into an array list. So we will use a typecast as array list and data element as our role object ID. And then we will also try to get the size of this array, which we will use in the validation. And the size of the array is a number on the array. Use the size array function, and then we will also need to retrieve the first element from the array. So I will call it as get role, because we'll try to get the role, extract the role from the roles array, and that will be a string, and that will be on added data element from the array, and get the first element, add it there. So we have all these data elements ready to be used. And finally, once we retrieve the role, we will also need another constant data element to just store the default role. So we will create a default role data element of type string, and it is a constant. If there is no role information available from in the request information in the JSON body, then we will add a default role for the user. So let's initialize this data element to the role name, which is default role in the endpoint application. And then we will need two JSON map data elements to hold the JSON map operations to replace the role. So once we extract the role from our map object from the request information, so we want to update the role which is existing in the request information. Instead of role object ID combination, we want to update that with just the role. So we will need two data elements here. One is JMap. I will use remove, and that will be string data type that will be on the JMap. So we will use the remove function to remove the existing value. And another one will be JMap put, which we will use put role, which we will use to replace the role information within the request. So that will be again on the JMap, and this time we'll use the put function. So it will be role object ID key, and we will add the data element role, because this is the data element we are setting as a role value. So we'll use that. So we have prepared our all the data elements. Next, we'll create a data element where we will hold the string format of the updated JSON map. So let's create final body of string data type, and we have chosen the added data element, and we'll select JMap, and we'll use render map and add that. And next we will update the default data element, which is the JSON body, with this updated information in the string format. So for that, JSON body put, it doesn't matter what is the name, because this will be a standalone element. So we have to choose the source type as added data element, because we are going to update the body, and select put here, and this will be JSON body, and we will update it with the previous data element final body. Next, we need to create a data element that will update the request endpoint, which is the sale point object for the request information. So let's create that data element. Request endpoint update, and since that is a sale point object, let's choose that and select the set body method, and we will set this to the updated JSON variable, which is body. Add it, save and close. Okay, next is to add the flow to our rule, and click the flow tab here, and we will add our code to a try block. So add the try catch block, and here the first thing we will add to the flow is our JSON list data element. So select that, and you can see how it is getting added, the try block. And the next data element we will add is our map object, where we are getting the first element from the JSON list. And next we will check for if this map is not null. So add the condition, on the JMap not null, then we are going to proceed further with retrieving the role information. So add our role object ID. This will retrieve our role information, which is the first, which is the key role object ID from our request information map object. And after that, we will also add our role data element, and then we will check whatever object we have retrieved is not empty. So that is our role object ID, and is not null. And one more condition, if it is in the format of an array. So let's add condition and select a role object ID again, and if it is looking like an array list, then we will add our array roles array data element, which will convert the retrieved role information into an array object. And after that, we will check the size of this array. So for that, we have to add a if block, and then the condition here, the role size is greater than 0. And once we are good with the contents of the array, the existence of the role array, then we can go ahead and retrieve the first element from that role array, which will give us the role because it contains both role and object ID. So let's select our role, and then we will assign the first element of the role. But here, this will be an assignment. So click the assignment. And then add this data element, and we will also want to typecast as a string. Now, if there is no role found, then we want to add a default role, right? So that will be in the else part of the check, where we are checking for role object ID is an array list and it is not equal to null. So here we will assign a default role in the else part, and in the assignment we will choose our default role, and this is also a typecast. We don't need the typecast. So can remove it and re-add one more time. The default role, so that is added. And after this, we will replace the existing object ID, role object ID, in the JSON map. So we will use the remove, and that will be a standalone. So check that box So we'll remove the existing value, and then we will add the value which we have generated. Either it's a default role or the first element in the roles array. So whatever we have computed from the earlier logic, so add that, and this will replace the existing role with the desired role information. After we update the JSON map object, um, we will then convert it to the string and then update the JSON body. For that, add the final body, and then we will update the JSON body, and then we will update the endpoint object as well, the request endpoint. That will set the updated body in the request endpoint sale point object. And then we will add the catch block. So the catch block is added. We can add log statements by clicking the add logs and specifying the line number where we want to add the log message. So for that, look for the line number in the catch block, which is 75. So let's specify the line number and a message. Rule web services before operation error, and then add it. So if there is any variable to be added, we can add that and click add log. We can also change the log type to error. So for now, I will keep it as debug, and then let's save the changes. As you can see, the log statement has been added. And now in the final value, we should return the request endpoint object that has been modified. So let's select that. And we have completed the rule creation. Now we can save the rule, and we can also download it as an XML. Thank you for watching.